Singapore, a tiny island off Malaysia, not much bigger than New York City and home to 5.6 million people. But rewind the clock just 50 years and you'd find a different scene. A desperately poor country with a history of occupation and a need for serious rebuilding after World War II. Fast forward to today, and Singapore boasts an economic output of nearly $500 billion, making it the 33rd largest economy globally. It outshines much larger countries like the UAE, Vietnam, and even Malaysia, its bigger neighbor to the north. The success story of Singapore isn't your typical rags to riches tale. It's more like a forced independence plot twist. After being a part of Malaysia, Singapore found itself on its own in 1965. The new government realized it needed a strong hand to turn things around, and that's when the journey towards prosperity began. One of the first moves was a unique form of benign authoritarianism. The government took charge, reclaiming land for affordable public housing. This might not sound exciting, but it laid the foundation for what was to come. Now, about those low income taxes. Singapore's got a reputation for it. Only those earning over $1 million Singaporean dollars a year face the highest rate of 24%. But a mandatory 20% of workers' salaries is taken by the government, not for spending, but for a communal investment fund. Employers throw in an additional 16%. That's a whopping 36% of income being saved, double the average savings rate in the USA. And Singaporeans, being diligent savers, stash away even more, keeping 54.6% of their earnings on average. But why did the government go down this road? Well, it needed to attract industries that made sense for the tiny island. At first, Singapore couldn't compete with its larger neighbors in terms of people, resources, or land. But it had a secret weapon, the Malacca Straits, the busiest shipping lane globally, right at its doorstep. This prime location turned Singapore into a major player in the shipping game. The government also strategically invested in education, creating a skilled workforce. Industries like finance, manufacturing, and technology started setting up shop, transforming Singapore into an economic powerhouse. Now remember those glass skyscrapers and glamorous industries? They're part of the Singapore narrative, but not the whole story. The real success lies in careful planning, a unique blend of free market mechanics and central planning, and a focus on building a strong foundation. So, can other countries replicate Singapore's success? It's a tough one. The factors that led to Singapore's rise are a rare combination, and trying to duplicate them elsewhere might be like chasing a unicorn. The history, the geography, the policies, they all played a role that's hard to recreate. Back in the colonial days, Singapore was a buzzing trading port. And guess what? It still is. But now the people of Singapore have figured out a way to make it work for them. Today, one of its biggest moneymakers is a bit surprising. It's like a gas station for the world's cargo ships. These ships are like big, hungry giants, and Singapore sits right at the doorstep, offering them fuel at prices even lower than what you'd find in the Gulf states. As Asia became a hub for low-cost manufacturing and global trade ramped up, Singapore took advantage. It set up major oil facilities, importing oil from the South Pacific and the Persian Gulf, and selling it to ships passing through the Malacca Straits, a natural bottleneck in the shipping world. But that's not all. Singapore wanted to be the go-to place for all things shipping. So it created the region's largest commodities exchange, a place where companies can lock in prices for resources traded all over Asia. To kickstart this industry, the government played a clever hand, enticing big multinational oil companies to invest in Singapore by promising a share of the profits. It was a win-win. The companies got a piece of the action, and Singapore got its foot in the door of the global oil game. Now you might wonder why these big companies chose Singapore. Sure, its location was key, but what sealed the deal was a unique blend of authority and capitalism that Singapore offered. The government provided a stable environment for business, a bit like having a security blanket. Plus, adopting an English common law legal system was like speaking the language of international business. It made companies feel comfortable and secure. So being at the right place at the right time, with the right deals and the right authority, that's how Singapore laid the foundation of its economic success. But it didn't stop there. Singapore wisely reinvested its early success back into its people and industries, ensuring a cycle of growth. Now, let's bust a myth. Singapore didn't become rich by having super low taxes. It's true that their corporate tax rate is 17%, which is on the lower side globally, but it's not zero. Individuals still pay taxes, And there are other costs like high property taxes and the not-so-fun expenses of owning and driving a car. Singapore is tiny. I mean, really tiny. Being a small island means they don't have to stretch their resources too thin. It's like managing one mid-sized city instead of an entire country. So even if the taxes seem comparable to other advanced economies, Singapore can make the most out of its resources because it's, well, physically compact. Oh, and they kind of cheat a bit too. About 10% of their workforce commutes from Malaysia every day. These folks contribute to the economy but aren't officially counted in Singapore's population. Sneaky, right? It's like having extra players on your team without them being on the scoreboard. So when you see those GDP per capita figures, remember, they might be a tad inflated because of this economic arithmetic loophole. Singapore is not alone in this. Luxembourg does a similar trick. Both are wealthy, but this commuting workforce gives them a bit of an advantage in the economic game. However, slashing taxes wasn't the secret sauce. It's more like a combination of factors that turn Singapore into an economic powerhouse. The government in power makes decisions without much opposition, but they don't use that power to fill their own pockets. Plus, there are no better options until world-leading industries are established. Sounds like a lot of ifs, right? Now, if a country goes through rapid development with these conditions, it could be the next Singapore of its region. But let's be real, not every place has these perfect conditions. And there are probably better examples to follow for countries looking to grow fast. So if we judge this country on a scale out of 10, the result would be quite interesting. Singapore has a GDP of $466 billion, making it the 33rd largest economy globally. That's bigger than countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia. Impressive, right? It gets an 8 out of 10. Now here's the cool part. This massive GDP is spread out over a population of less than 5.5 million people. That means Singapore has a GDP per capita of 73,000, putting it in the same league as the most productive countries. It gets a 9 out of 10 for that. Now let's talk stability. Singapore is technically a multi-party democracy, but in reality it's been ruled by one party since day one. The people seem to like it, and it has provided economic consistency. But it's not a perfect score because, well, a one-party rule can have its complications. Still, it gets a solid 9 out of 10. Growth has been Singapore's middle name. In the last 2 decades alone, the economy quadrupled in size, despite facing challenges like the Asian financial crisis, the global financial crisis, and COVID. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10 for its growth game. Finally, industries. Singapore is a jack of all trades. It's a big player in oil trading, even though it doesn't have much oil itself. The manufacturing industry is surprisingly strong, and it's a global financial hub. While it's not the king of any industry by itself, it still gets a solid 8 out of 10. Add it all up, and Singapore scores an average of 8.8 out of 10. That's seriously impressive. So what are your thoughts on Singapore's unique blend of factors that propelled it to prosperity? Share your opinions in the comments below. And if you want more content like this, let us know what topics you'd like us to explore next. Thanks for watching. Until next time.